In today's lessons from the lab, I wanted to dive into ice baths or cold water immersion. Cold water immersion, is often being claimed or it's believed to have reduced edema or swelling, decreases the perception of pain associated with the muscle soreness, decreased perception of fatigue, alters localized blood flows, alters localized tissue and core temperature, changes heart rate, reduces muscle spasm, reduced tissue inflammation, reduced muscle damage, and improves range of motion. So that is what people have always believed cold water immersion helps with, but many of these things aren't actually supported by research. So let's take a look at cold water immersion or ice baths and really have a think about how it could potentially help or hinder your performance. So there are a number of research papers out there that show cold water immersion does speed up short-term or acute recovery by decreasing the inflammatory pathways as we talked about. However, does reducing the inflammatory pathways actually mean you have sped up recovery, or are you just removing some of those symptoms of not feeling good and at the end of the day you're just feeling better but you haven't actually physiologically recovered? The problem is that if you are consistently reducing the inflammatory process after training, there is a potential, and research has shown this in both endurance training and also resistance training, that there seems to be some decrease in adaptation over time with this repeated use of cold water immersion. It's probably a good thing to avoid following training on a consistent chronic basis, as in using it after every training session, because it only might be a slight decrease in your adaptation to that training session, but that little adaptation added up over multiple training sessions, multiple training weeks, months, then we start to get decreases adding up over time. On the whole, I would tend to suggest avoiding cold water immersion following day-to-day training sessions. So in your day-to-day training, avoid cold water immersion because of that potential to reduce training adaptations with chronic use. With that in mind, I'm not hating on cold water immersion. I think it has its place, and this is where I think its place is. In training, if you're doing a big block of training, say you're doing a little bit of a mini training camp, and you want to put in an abnormal amount of work during that weekend to stimulate a supercompensation, then getting up the next day before your another big session after you've done a big session, it potentially could be a good time to have those legs feeling good again so you can go out and hit it a bit harder. 1 or 2 cold water immersion sessions after training isn't going to have a big effect, given that your overall training volume is going to outweigh the negative effect from the positive adaptations that you get from the training. So the other place I would recommend it, if it is practical for your situation, is multi-day racing. When you have to get up in the morning and back up after a big day of racing, you want to be feeling good. You don't want to have extremely sore, tired legs, and cold water immersion could help this. It helps by reducing that inflammatory process, as we talked about, reducing that swelling, and that in turn reduces the delayed onset muscle soreness, that tight, stiff feeling that you get. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have recovered any better, as in there's still the muscle fiber damage, there's still the depletion in the muscle glycogen. It's not magically going to help you recover faster, but if you feel better, you're going to perform better. So there you have lessons from the lab done.